Visiting the mall makes me want to springboard headfirst onto a rusty nail. The slow-walking patrons, sitting on those spine-crunching wooden benches, the entire experience is awful. Especially now, in the midst of a global pandemic, as witnessing any kind of mass gathering in poorly ventilated corridors is sure to get my palms sweaty, but the original core of the suspicion has to do with what I think the overstimulation does to people. Seemingly normal, good citizens reduced here to impulse-driven pleasure seekers, mindlessly shuffling into the next store at the first sight of that ever-inviting 60% off sale ticket. And before it begins to sound like I'm recording this narration from atop an extremely high horse whilst applying Joker makeup, please know I exemplify this behavior. I'm at the mercy of the dopamine hit that comes with consuming. I constantly grant permission to treat myself within the mall as if I'm someone who has ever been disciplined enough to deny myself anything. So, what better place to tell a story about mass consumerism, capitalism, and the materialistic tendencies of a first world nation, too wrapped up in its own self-absorption to ever notice the greater threat? I'd like to express my thoughts and feelings about the video game that tells that story. Capcom's 2006 outing, Dead Rising. Now, I think Dead Rising was groundbreaking because what it did both thematically and technically. It became the poster boy for the term next gen way back in the day. It satiated the appetite of one audience who were Xbox dude bros who just wanted to kill zombies. But underneath, it also had this story that gave insight into how America was viewed by the rest of the world. However, for as much respect as I have for Dead Rising, I cannot deny that it's also a very clumsy game. It's just kinda what happened with the titles released in the 6th and 7th console generation's launch windows. They innovated by way of jank. For example, the sheer number of zombies acting independently on screen was staggering for the time. However, the human NPCs acted equally brain-dead. For every moment of genuine mystery that made me scratch the hairs of my chinny chin chin, there was an equally frustrating one that made me want to tear them out. Just kidding, I'm unable to grow a beard. Genetics are the cruelest game of all. So, originally my feelings towards Dead Rising were that of complicated ones. But as I now look back on the game some 15 years later, I'm beginning to wonder if at least some of these frustrations were intentional. So, I'd like to run down the list of Dead Rising's biggest criticisms and explain why I think they actually make the game a more engaging experience that you should go out of your way to have. And in order to do this, I think we first have to take a quick look at the way Dead Rising functions. For those unaware, everything within Dead Rising runs on a strict timer, as the narrative takes place over the course of 72 in-game hours. Protagonist and freelance journalist Frank West attempts to document a breaking story in the local shopping mall of fictional small-town Willamette, Colorado, which appears to be containing a zombie virus. His plan is to get the scoop, survive for 3 days, and leave to break the story, as that's when his helicopter is organized to come pick him up. Now, these 72 in-game hours amount to about 11 hours of real time spent playing, and it's how you manage this time that determines your overall experience. As the story progressing cutscenes occur at specific dates and times within these 72 hours. Frank is in constant dialogue with fellow survivors who survey the entire mall via CCTV footage from back at the safe house, and thus they inform him of when and where things are happening. Meaning, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you must drop it all to be in the exact place these characters tell you before the time expires, or you're met with a fail state. Regardless of how far you are into the 72 hours, missing a single story event results in a game over. The story will just stop progressing, and you're left with an option to walk around like an idiot until the 72 hours expire. So, if you're dawdling around in the first hour of the game and say, fail to escort a main character as instructed, you can technically spend another 10 hours in this game locked out of seeing the narrative unfold and receive a bad ending. Of course, you would be insane to actually do this though, as you can just reload your save to before the deadline. However, it's here where Dead Rising's major criticism lies. Because missing a story progression deadline, aka arriving late, is really easy to do. And in this fail state, almost everybody will opt to reload their save so they can correct their mistakes and arrive at the location promptly the second time. But here's a doozy. Sometimes reloading your last save is just not possible. as it's entirely plausible to either save trap yourself somewhere, as you saved but haven't given yourself enough time now to make it to the next story event, or you can accidentally find yourself severely underleveled as the game progresses, making the boss fights near impossible, meaning some players might be forced to pick the far less forgiving second option, to begin an entirely new campaign. But it's totally cool, guys, your current stats can transfer over. If any of this sounds frustrating or unfair, it is. Dead Rising as a whole, but especially your first few hours, are some of the coldest and most unforgiving I have ever experienced with a game, because you're not explicitly warned about anything I just mentioned. In fact, the closest thing Dead Rising has to a tutorial is your first encounter with the Horde. You find yourself at the back of the entrance plaza, and you must wade through an ocean of undead to ascend the stairs to safety. Everyone is caught off guard and are instantly overwhelmed by the sheer number of them. Despite your best attempts to stave off the onslaught, you cannot stop the horror. The names of the deceased flash upon your screen like a jackpot at the slot machine. There are too many people, you can't save them all. Eventually, you just eke out an escape up the stairs as the massacre continues, and that is Dead Rising's first lesson. Its only warning, that being, trying to do the right thing and saving others will get you killed. The other notable thing that happens in this introduction is that you, as the player, will learn just how awful Frank controls. Being an ordinary guy, he's not exactly adept at slaying zombies. His movement is oafish, his strikes wild, his health near non-existent. Frank sucks. So in a moment where you're compelled by human instinct to move swiftly and help others, the game asks you to control someone who is utterly incapable of doing so. Soon enough, you learn that Frank can level up via experience points, and that his stats will dramatically improve. His overall health, damage, throw range, movement speed, and item slots increase. And as you'd imagine, experience points are gained via slaying zombies and completing story events, but the activity that rewards the maximum experience is rescuing survivors by bringing them back to the safe house. But infamously, the survivors in Dead Rising have some of the most useless, brain-dead AI I've ever had the misfortune of interacting with, and I almost exclusively played licensed games as a kid. My first two PS1 games were Scooby-Doo and the Cyber Chase and Shrek Treasure Hunt. Anyone watching this that knows anything about either of those games is apologizing profusely to me right now, but it's fine. It's fine, guys, they just made me stronger. It just made me strong. So now we have a game where you must survive for 3 days in a zombie plague while being dictated to. Meanwhile, you must also go out of your way to rescue survivors who barely cooperate, while constantly amassing food and weapons, which also just break, by the way, all in the middle of unraveling a conspiracy of how a zombie virus broke out in this small town in the first place. That's a lot of plates spinning at once, and dropping even one of them means potentially restarting the game from the beginning. As you can imagine, time management being the core concept of a video game turned a lot of people off. And while I can't blame anyone for getting frustrated, I personally found that these handcuffs made Dead Rising a captivating experience. Because what I think these strict conditions forced you as the player to do was to become informed. I think it made Dead Rising a standout example of progression done right. Like, there was an extrinsic form of progression that presented itself as leveling up and stat increases, but the real satisfying progression, like the good stuff, comes from your understanding of the mall. See, Willamette Parkview Mall isn't the largest game map ever, but it is intimidating, because what it lacks in sheer size, it makes up for in density. Forget each area, every single store in this mall is packed to the brim with detail, information, and equipable items, as every little nook was explorable. Just about anything can be picked up and used as a weapon, each different in weight. No two items felt the same. Smashing a zombie's head in with a sledgehammer is just chef's kiss. Mwah. It's a masterclass in sound design. Not to mention how corpses could be mangled, the posters and advertisements around the mall, the jingles and alerts over the PA system, the information provided for every single store in the menu, Dead Rising is in the details. It's also worth noting just how vibrant and colorful the mall is. Unlike almost all video games and zombie media at the time that would rely on darker tones and low lighting conditions painting everything in grays, greens, blacks and browns, Dead Rising spends the majority of its playtime in broad daylight, as the mall utilizes massive windows and skylights that make each area in the mall burst with color. All of this culminating in complete and utter immersion, establishing a familiarity that becomes, oddly, serene. Now, don't get me wrong, despite its vibrance, early game the mall is still harrowing. It's tense, it's nerve-wracking. Every time you leave the safe house, you count your prayers, knowing this is the trip where you probably won't make it back. A mistake as innocent as holding the wrong item at the wrong time could be the difference between life and death. But once you finally understand the layout of the mall, with the soft lounge piano music playing over the PA system, it just starts to feel like home. Because you know where everything is, like things on the shelves in your bedroom. It all has its place and is needed for one thing or another. It becomes enjoyable to just exist in, as everything here was immaculately crafted to feel real. Sure, aspects are exaggerated here, but this shopping center feels like one I have been to before. So it's only when you begin to truly study this mall in painstaking detail do things stop feeling overwhelming and terrifying. And the biggest part of why has to do with the way Dead Rising loads in the different areas of the mall. As every time you visit one of these main areas, everything within each store reverts to how you found it, remaining completely untouched. So if you found a skateboard in the sports store in the Paradise Plaza, an endless supply is going to be there every single time you enter the Paradise Plaza, regardless of if you have previously picked one up and taken it somewhere else. Meaning, through sheer curiosity and exploration, you can use trial and error to scout out all the useful items in the game, test their effectiveness against the zombies, and create a list of essential items to obtain every time you leave the hideout. If you're into organization or planning or scheduling, this gameplay is crack. Dead Rising turns into a Metroid game, except you know where all the power-ups are before you even leave the first screen. Dead Rising is just Back to the Future 2 or Majora's Mask, it's time travel. Only here, the characters on screen aren't the ones leaping through time. You are. It's a feeling of progression that's entirely unique to the medium of video games, and it's only now where the idea of restarting your game actually starts to sound really appealing. As now you have the stats to be able to steamroll your way through the enemies at the start of the game, but now you also have the knowledge to begin preparation for what's ahead. You start practically skipping past zombies because they're no longer threatening as much as they are inconvenient. You reach a point where you know what every store contains, where the hotspots for useful items are, and all that knowledge makes you feel unstoppable. Dead Rising becomes this incredible exercise in decision making, both in long-form, planned, well-thought-out routes through the mall and smaller split-second ones when it inevitably all goes up in flames. For example, the most obvious choice of weapon in Dead Rising, guns, are found in the gun shop. However, the gun store is in the most dangerous location in the mall, sitting at the end of an extremely tight corridor that doesn't have an exit at its end. So even if you manage to scrape and claw your way in, you might just have to use all of your newly acquired ammo just to escape again. If you want food, the most logical place to find it is also littered with zombies. Sure, the fruit and veg up the front of the supermarket are easy enough to get, but they only replenish a small amount of health. If you want the good stuff, meat and wine, they're all the way at the back. So each time one of these dilemmas comes up, you're sacrificing something valuable. Time, food, experience, weapons, ammo. Literally every time you venture from the safe house means certain loss, at the possibility of more gain, but it's never guaranteed. The risk versus reward factor is by far my favorite part of the experience, and I can't even begin to describe the fist-pumping adrenaline of just getting back to the safe house with a group of survivors with mere seconds to spare until the next cutscene played out. It's nail-biting, white knuckles gripping the controller type stuff. And if anything, because of this ultra-specific gameplay, I'd almost argue the awful AI assists Dead Rising in creating this feeling of chaos. Yep, I think I'm trying to defend the inexcusable, legitimate criticism of garbage AI, and I'm gonna do it in a real stupid way. You know those horror movies where the girl gets chased by the killer and runs up the stairs instead of out of the house? And then you turn to your buddy Philip and mention how no one would actually be dumb enough to do that in real life? But then the pandemic happened and you realized you were giving humanity far too much credit? Well, in a quote-unquote real zombie scenario, I think the majority of people would act this erratic and afraid and dumb. And while they didn't get it entirely right with the NPCs, it's something that's seen throughout the game's story too. Because as any good purveyor of classic undead cinema knows, the most dangerous thing in a zombie apocalypse isn't the zombies, it's other people. In Dead Rising, most survivors immediately go into self-preservation mode, barricading themselves up, hoarding supplies. It's every person for themselves as mass hysteria erupts. And for some, it becomes all too much. A war veteran thinks he's back in Vietnam. A fellow photographer becomes obsessed with capturing the most gruesome image possible. A cult leader just appears and has already brainwashed a bunch of survivors. It's anarchy. They provide so much more danger to Frank and the others, as their actions are not just motivated by pure survival, but erratic emotion too. And as regular old Frank, you have to stop their havoc and rescue the survivors they hold captive in order to continue to unravel the mystery. Confrontations that act as this game's boss battles. And if traversing the mall felt like slow suffocation, the fights against the psychopaths are brutal, manic scraps for survival. Adrenaline rushes that just aren't present in the minute-to-minute traversal. And while I think they make for fun and frantic gameplay, I think these moments really hammer home just how ordinary Frank is. There's almost a guilt here, because there goes another living soul that could have been saved. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail as to where the story goes, as the conspiracy surrounding a duo of mysterious figures is the motivating factor in putting up with Dead Rising's less desirable aspects. But I don't think it's a spoiler to reveal that there are a hell of a lot less people at the end of this story than there is at the beginning. And it doesn't take long before things revert back from feeling almost homely to being eerily quiet. While it sounds silly, being chased by a killer clown isn't nearly as scary to me as existing in a shopping mall with no one else in it for an extended period of time. Maybe because it's the direct opposite of a mall's purpose, a space designed to be bustling with people, now completely devoid of consciousness. If you've ever seen a real mall with no people in it, or even been in a movie theater by yourself with no one else around, just experiencing an absence of humanity in spaces specifically designed for mass congress is really unsettling. And maybe it shouldn't feel like that. I mean, living inside the mall is like every kid's dream, but because you'd inescapably consume from the mall, I think you'd almost be reduced to this primitive state. And if you can't create, I think you lose a significant part of what it is to be human. I don't know if you've noticed yet, but the last minute or so of this video hasn't been about Dead Rising at all. My entire decision to play this game again and ultimately make this video was because of this single idea. For context, I've just come out of what was officially the longest lockdown in the world, and it entirely changed the way I consumed. I was receiving packages from online orders almost daily. I was binge watching television series seasons at a time. I'd play video games for hours and barely remember what they were about the next time I picked up the controller. In a period of what was probably mild depression, where I had the free will to create, to make YouTube videos whenever I pleased, I turned to mass consumption instead so I could feel things. A parcel a day keeps the sadness away, but it ended up just making things worse. And now that I'm finally out, it's not only something I have to dial back, it's now something I'll do socially again. Partially out of peer pressure, but also because consuming just feels less sad when you're doing it with someone else. Basically, I want nothing to do with the mall when it has lots of people in it, and even less to do with it when it has no one in it. but somehow I'm at my lowest when I'm avoiding it entirely. And for a game to use its medium to show me that, to just flip over the mirror and make me stare at my own experience, is worth so much more to me than a 78 Metacritic rating or whatever. Suddenly, the way NPCs act or how the save system works isn't nearly as important. So if anything about this video game grabbed your attention, check it out, even if you've heard elsewhere that Dead Rising is really dumb and broken. Because trust me, if you are too at the time of playing it, it might just change the way you think about stuff. Thanks for watching.